To modify our existing match play model, one of the first things we need to do is take into account the fact that we can now hire and fire employees. Of course, we need additional parameters here, and even one of the parameters that we have, which is the number of workers, is now simply the initial number of workers. But we need two additional parameters. Let's go ahead and insert those right here in rows 8 and 9. This simply are going to include the value or the cost for hiring a worker and the cost for, in essence, firing a worker. I'm going to call it a little bit nicer term, workforce reduction cost per worker. We have two numbers for these values, one 1850 for hiring and 2200 for firing. Now, of course, all this does is bring in numbers, and by the way, these are dollars. So let's go ahead and paste, or at least format paint, those two numbers so that's clear. The main thing here, though, to take into account is the fact that we now have to keep track of the number of workers we have each month. So instead of assuming it's constant, we need to build an inventory system in essence. How many workers do we start with in a month? Do we fire and or hire any of those immediately? Put those workers on the line and adjust our production abilities to take into account these additional workers. So someplace in our model we're going to need space to allow workers to be hired and fired, which is a decision variable as we discussed earlier. Let's go ahead and insert some rows here. I think you'll see what I mean. In fact, we're short one row. Let's insert 5 rows. It's only because I know what I'm inserting. I would suggest, again, you kind of sketch this out on the side and you have a better idea of exactly what you're trying to achieve. But in essence, what we're doing is something very similar to our production plan. We have beginning number of workers. Production in this case is workers hired. Demand would be workers fired because that's the reduction, if you will. And then finally we have the ending inventory, or the workers that will actually be available on the line that month. We're assuming these workers can immediately get on the line. They're very quick in training them, and we can put them on the line and get them working and productive immediately. And this all happens at the beginning of the month. Now note, unlike the production plan, both the workforce hiring and firing are going to be decision cells. Those aren't cells where we will have to come up with a formula. So we have workers at the beginning of the month. We have the number hired, the number fired, if we want to use that term here, or laid off, a little bit nicer way to say that. And then finally we have the workers available. Now, this is kind of like saying workers at the end of the month, but it's really not the end of the month. It's not an ending inventory. It's workers immediately available. So a better terminology would be that title. Workers at the beginning of the month, of the first month, is simply going to be equal to our initial number of workers in C6. Hired and laid off are both decision cells, so we don't need to come up with formulas for those. In fact, the best thing we could do is simply highlight those and give those a shading indicating these will be decision cells. And again, give it the white format for the font. We will need to test this as well. So workers available would be equal to the number of workers we started with, plus the number of workers we hired, minus the number of workers we laid off, giving us a total in this case of 33. The next month, we start with, again, the amount of workers we had available in the previous month. And this repeats itself. So this formula is ultimately copyable, as is this formula. Let's go ahead and test this to make sure this is working. We do have some adjustments to make, but we'll do that in a later video. Say we added 1 employee, we should be getting the results immediately and put them on the line. Let's take month 2 and lay off 2, and you can see again that month now has 32 employees on the line. So outside of a little bit of formatting here, let's go ahead and give this a comma format without any values to the right of the decimal place. That also indicates that we're going to be working with an integer constraint here when we deal with this in Solver. We're not going to hire and fire partial employees. And you might note that this particular row and this particular row are bolded. So let's take that off just to clean it up a bit. So if this all works, which appears to work, at least in this part of the model, we should be able to hire and lay off employees and that would adjust the workers available. Now we simply need to take the model that we have and adjust it for the workers available each month, rather than the static number of workers we had in the previous model, which was in value or in cell C6.